Good morning, and welcome to our lecture on multi-party negotiations, coalitions, and teams in the Canadian context. Canada's federal system, multicultural society with 22% visible minorities, and resource-based economy create a unique landscape for complex negotiations involving diverse stakeholders. Today, we'll explore how multiple parties coordinate, form coalitions, and operate as teams, drawing on case studies like the British Columbia carbon tax and the Great Bear Rainforest Agreement. Our goal is to equip you with strategies to navigate Canada's intricate political, business, and community negotiations, ensuring collaborative and equitable outcomes. Multi-party negotiations require managing diverse interests, from federal-provincial coordination to Indigenous and environmental stakeholder dialogues, as seen in the 2019 Trans Mountain Pipeline talks. Canada's collaborative ethos, rooted in the Multiculturalism Act, demands cultural sensitivity and inclusive strategies. We'll examine theoretical frameworks, such as coalition formation and principal-agent dynamics, and practical approaches, like voting mechanisms and team cohesion, to address challenges in Canada's diverse settings. By the end, you'll understand how to foster cooperation among multiple parties, from Ottawa's political arenas to British Columbia's resource negotiations, ensuring sustainable agreements. Let's begin by exploring the dynamics of multi-party negotiations in Canada's unique context. Let's start by exploring the dynamics of multi-party negotiations in Canada, where diverse stakeholders shape complex interactions, per Lewicki et al., 2020. Multi-party negotiations involve three or more parties with distinct interests, such as federal, provincial, and Indigenous governments in resource talks. Canada's federal structure requires coordination across jurisdictions, as seen in healthcare negotiations where overlapping responsibilities demand collaboration. Coalition building is critical in minority government scenarios, like the 2019 federal election where Justin Trudeau's Liberals negotiated with opposition parties to pass legislation. Effective team negotiation expands integrative potential, creating value through collaborative strategies, as in interprovincial trade agreements. Cultural diversity, with 20% foreign-born residents, adds complexity, requiring sensitivity to differing communication styles, as in Indigenous negotiations prioritizing long-term impacts. Resource management, like the Trans Mountain Pipeline, involves governments, Indigenous communities, and environmental groups, balancing economic and ecological goals. For students, understanding these dynamics is key. Consider a negotiation in Alberta's oil sector. Coordinating diverse stakeholders ensures equitable outcomes, reflecting Canada's inclusive ethos. Challenges include managing conflicting interests, but collaborative frameworks mitigate risks. As we transition, we'll examine coalition formation, exploring how alliances shape Canada's negotiation landscape. Continuing our discussion, let's delve into decision-making challenges in Canadian multi-party negotiations, per Lewicki et al., 2020. Majority rule, while efficient, can limit integrative potential by overlooking minority interests, as seen in early interprovincial trade talks where smaller provinces felt marginalized. Unanimous decision-making, though time-consuming, produces efficient outcomes by ensuring all voices are heard, critical in Canada's federal system balancing minority rights. Voting paradoxes, like the Condorcet paradox, complicate preference aggregation, where cyclic preferences lead to no clear winner, as in some policy negotiations. Strategic voting, where parties misrepresent preferences, distorts outcomes, as seen in political coalition talks. Consensus agreements, requiring careful facilitation, foster collaboration, as in the 2017 Canadian Free Trade Agreement. Canada's political system demands balancing majority and minority interests, reflecting its inclusive ethos. For students, mastering these dynamics is essential. Consider a healthcare negotiation in Ontario. consensus-driven approaches ensure equitable outcomes, aligning with the Canada Health Act. Challenges include managing paradoxes, but facilitation mitigates risks. As we transition, we'll explore voting mechanisms in depth, examining their impact on Canadian negotiations. Building on decision-making challenges, let's explore voting mechanisms in Canadian multi-party negotiations, per Lewicki et al., 2020. Majority rule, common in political settings, can limit integrative potential by sidelining minority voices, as in early environmental policy talks. Unanimous decision-making ensures inclusivity, critical in Canada's multicultural society, as seen in Indigenous land negotiations requiring all parties' consent. Voting paradoxes, like the Condorcet paradox, create cyclic preferences, complicating outcomes, as in federal-provincial funding disputes. Strategic voting, where parties prioritize tactical gains, distorts true preferences, as in minority government coalitions. Consensus, though challenging, fosters equitable outcomes through skilled facilitation, as in the 2016 Great Bear Rainforest Agreement. Canada's context, with 22% visible minorities, emphasizes balanced outcomes reflecting diverse interests. For students, understanding voting mechanisms is key. Consider a resource negotiation in British Columbia. Consensus-driven approaches ensure inclusivity, aligning with Canada's reconciliation goals. Challenges include managing paradoxes, but skilled facilitation ensures progress. As we transition, we'll examine team negotiation strategies, exploring how cohesive teams enhance outcomes in Canada's diverse landscape. Following voting mechanisms, let's explore team negotiation strategies in Canada, per Lewicki et al., 2020. Teammate selection impacts cohesion, requiring cultural competence and interpersonal skills, as in Indigenous negotiations where diverse expertise ensures respect. Team size balances expertise with efficiency. Large teams, common in Canadian resource talks, risk coordination challenges, as in the Trans Mountain Pipeline negotiations. Effective communication, through structured processes like regular briefings, ensures alignment, critical in federal-provincial talks. Team cohesion presents unified positions, enhancing credibility, as in the 2017 Canadian Free Trade Agreement. Common information bias, where teams focus on shared data, limits effectiveness, but structured sharing mitigates this, as in environmental negotiations. Canada's collaborative norms, rooted in the Multiculturalism Act, support cohesive teams. For students, mastering team dynamics is essential. Consider a negotiation in Alberta's oil sector. Cohesive teams with diverse expertise ensure equitable outcomes, reflecting Canada's inclusive ethos. Challenges include managing large teams, but structured processes ensure success. As we transition, we'll explore coalition formation, examining how alliances drive Canadian negotiations. Continuing our discussion, let's examine coalition formation in Canadian negotiations, a critical strategy for aligning multiple parties, per Lewicki et al., 2020. Identifying shared interests, like economic growth and interprovincial trade talks, unites coalition members, as in the 2017 Canadian Free Trade Agreement. Building trust among members, through transparent communication, fosters collaboration, as in minority government coalitions post-2019 election. Managing internal conflicts, such as differing provincial priorities, requires skilled facilitation to maintain cohesion. Aligning on strategic goals, like environmental sustainability in resource talks, ensures unified positions. Ensuring equitable representation, especially for Indigenous and minority groups, aligns with Canada's inclusive ethos. With 22% visible minorities, Canada's negotiations demand coalitions that respect diverse perspectives. For students, mastering coalition formation is key. Consider a negotiation in Quebec involving French and Indigenous stakeholders. Shared interests and equitable representation ensure equitable outcomes, reflecting Canada's Multiculturalism Act. Challenges include internal conflicts, but trust building mitigates risks. As we transition, we'll explore principal-agent relationships, examining their role in Canadian negotiations. Following coalition formation, let's explore principal-agent relationships in Canadian negotiations, per Lewicki et al., 2020. In these dynamics, agents, e.g., negotiators, represent principals, e.g., governments or companies, as in the Trans Mountain Pipeline talks where government agents negotiated with stakeholders. Aligning agent incentives with principal goals, like economic benefits in trade agreements, ensures effective representation. Transparent communication, such as regular updates to principals, builds trust, critical in federal-provincial negotiations. Managing conflicts of interest, like differing priorities in resource talks, requires clear agreements. Monitoring agent performance, through performance metrics, ensures accountability, as in environmental negotiations. Fostering mutual trust between principals and agents strengthens outcomes, aligning with Canada's collaborative ethos. For students, understanding these dynamics is essential. Consider a business negotiation in Toronto. Transparent communication and aligned incentives ensure equitable outcomes, reflecting Canada's fairness commitment. Challenges include misaligned goals, but monitoring mitigates risks. As we transition, we'll explore intergroup dynamics, examining how group interactions shape Canadian negotiations. Building on principal-agent relationships, let's examine intergroup dynamics in Canadian negotiations, per Lewicki et al., 2020. Managing intergroup conflicts, like tensions between environmental and industry groups in resource talks, requires skilled facilitation, as in the Great Bear Rainforest Agreement. Fostering cross-group collaboration, through joint workshops, builds trust, as in interprovincial healthcare negotiations. Addressing cultural differences, such as Indigenous long-term perspectives versus industry's short-term goals, ensures respect, critical in Canada's multicultural society. Building shared goals, like sustainability in environmental talks, unites groups. Ensuring equitable outcomes, through inclusive representation, aligns with Canada's Multiculturalism Act. With 22% visible minorities, Canada's negotiations demand sensitivity to diverse group dynamics. For students, mastering intergroup dynamics is key. Consider a negotiation in British Columbia involving Indigenous and industry groups. Shared goals and cultural respect ensure equitable outcomes, reflecting Canada's reconciliation goals. Challenges include conflicting interests, but collaboration mitigates risks. As we transition, we'll explore Case Study 1, the British Columbia Carbon Tax, applying these concepts. Let's apply our concepts to the British Columbia Carbon Tax case, a landmark in Canadian environmental negotiations, per Government of Canada, 2019. The issue involved balancing economic growth with climate goals, requiring coordination among federal, provincial, industry, and NGO stakeholders. Multi-party negotiations used collaborative strategies, like consensus-building workshops, to align interests. Transparent data sharing on emissions and economic impacts fostered trust, while coalition formation among environmental and industry groups created balanced solutions. The outcome was an innovative carbon pricing policy, reducing emissions while maintaining competitiveness, implemented transparently to ensure accountability. Challenges included industry resistance and regional disparities, but Canada's collaborative ethos, supported by the Environmental Protection Act, facilitated success. For students, this case highlights multi-party coordination. Consider a similar negotiation in Alberta. Consensus and transparency ensure equitable outcomes, reflecting Canada's sustainability commitment. Cultural sensitivity, especially with Indigenous stakeholders, enhanced collaboration. As we transition, we'll explore the Great Bear Rainforest Agreement, examining how multi-party negotiations achieved conservation and economic balance. Following the carbon tax case, let's examine the 2016 Great Bear Rainforest Agreement, a pinnacle of multi-party negotiations in Canada, per British Columbia Ministry, 2016. The issue pitted conservation against economic development, involving First Nations, government, industry, and environmental groups. Collaborative talks, facilitated by neutral mediators, used consensus building to align diverse interests, like Indigenous rights and logging needs. Transparent data on ecological impacts fostered trust, while coalition formation ensured equitable representation. The outcome was a landmark agreement protecting 85% of the rainforest while supporting sustainable economic activities, balancing stakeholder interests. Long-term stewardship, through ongoing monitoring, ensured sustainability. Challenges included historical mistrust, but Canada's reconciliation focus facilitated success. For students, this case underscores inclusive negotiation. Consider a similar negotiation in Ontario. Collaborative talks and equitable representation ensure sustainable outcomes, reflecting Canada's environmental ethos. Cultural sensitivity was key to success. As we transition, we'll explore the Trans Mountain Pipeline case, examining principal-agent dynamics in complex negotiations. Continuing with case studies, let's explore the Trans Mountain Pipeline negotiations, a complex multi-party case, per Trans Mountain Corporation, 2020. The issue involved pipeline expansion conflicting with environmental and Indigenous concerns, engaging federal, provincial, Indigenous, and environmental stakeholders. Multi-party engagement, through consultations and public hearings, addressed concerns, with government agents representing public interests. Principal-agent dynamics were critical, requiring aligned incentives and transparent communication to maintain trust. The outcome included revised agreements incorporating Indigenous benefits and environmental protections, though negotiations remain ongoing. Cultural sensitivity, respecting Indigenous rights, and environmental considerations were central, aligning with Canada's reconciliation goals. Challenges included public opposition and jurisdictional disputes, but collaborative frameworks mitigated risks. For students, this case highlights principal-agent dynamics. Consider a similar negotiation in Saskatchewan. Transparent engagement and cultural sensitivity ensure equitable outcomes, reflecting Canada's inclusive ethos. As we transition, we'll explore managing conflicts in multi-party negotiations, examining strategies for resolution. Following our case studies, let's examine managing conflicts in Canadian multi-party negotiations, per Lewicki et al., 2020. Identifying conflict sources, like competing economic and environmental goals and resource talks, allows targeted resolution strategies. Using neutral mediators, as in the Great Bear Rainforest talks, ensures impartiality, fostering trust. Fostering open communication, through transparent data sharing, builds understanding, as in the British Columbia carbon tax negotiations. Promoting mutual concessions, like balancing conservation with economic benefits, creates integrative solutions. Ensuring equitable resolutions, critical in Canada's multicultural society, aligns with the Multiculturalism Act. With 22% visible minorities, Canada demands conflict management that respects diverse perspectives. For students, mastering conflict resolution is essential. Consider a negotiation in Manitoba involving Indigenous and industry groups. Neutral mediation and open communication ensure equitable outcomes, reflecting Canada's collaborative ethos. Challenges include entrenched positions, but facilitation mitigates risks. As we transition, we'll explore cultural sensitivity in multi-party negotiations, examining its role in Canada. Building on conflict management, let's explore cultural sensitivity in Canadian multi-party negotiations, per Lewicki et al., 2020. Understanding cultural norms, like Quebec's linguistic identity or Indigenous holistic perspectives, ensures respectful engagement, as in land claim talks. Adapting communication styles, such as storytelling in Indigenous negotiations or direct language in business settings, fosters understanding. Respecting diverse values, like long-term Indigenous priorities versus short-term industry goals, builds trust. Incorporating Indigenous protocols, like ceremonial openings, aligns with Canada's reconciliation goals, as in the Great Bear Rainforest Agreement. Fostering inclusive dialogue, through diverse stakeholder representation, ensures equitable outcomes, critical in Canada's 22% visible minority population. For students, cultural sensitivity is key. Consider a negotiation in Vancouver involving Asian Canadian and Indigenous stakeholders. Adapted communication and inclusive dialogue ensure equitable outcomes, reflecting the Multiculturalism Act. Challenges include cultural misunderstandings, but respect mitigates risks. As we transition, we'll explore ethical considerations, examining their role in Canadian negotiations. Following cultural sensitivity, let's examine ethical considerations in Canadian multi-party negotiations, per Lewicki et al., 2020. Ensuring transparency, like sharing data in the British Columbia carbon tax talks, builds trust among stakeholders. Promoting fairness and equity, critical in Canada's egalitarian culture, ensures balanced outcomes, as in Indigenous negotiations addressing historical redress. Respecting confidentiality, like protecting sensitive data in business deals, maintains trust. Adhering to legal obligations, such as the Canadian Human Rights Act, ensures ethical conduct, as in resource talks. Fostering trust and integrity strengthens long-term relationships, aligning with Canada's collaborative ethos. With diverse stakeholders, Canada demands ethical negotiations. For students, mastering ethical considerations is essential. Consider a negotiation in Alberta's oil sector. Transparency and fairness ensure equitable outcomes, reflecting Canada's reconciliation goals. Challenges include balancing transparency with confidentiality, but legal frameworks guide success. As we transition, we'll explore technology in multi-party negotiations, examining its role in Canada. Continuing our exploration, let's examine technology's role in Canadian multi-party negotiations, per Lewicki et al., 2020. Leveraging digital platforms, like virtual meeting tools, facilitates coordination across Canada's vast geography, as in interprovincial talks. Enhancing data-driven decisions, through analytics and trade negotiations, ensures informed outcomes, as in the 2017 Canadian Free Trade Agreement. Facilitating virtual collaboration, like online stakeholder forums, includes diverse voices, critical in multicultural settings. Ensuring cybersecurity, especially in business deals, protects sensitive data, building trust. Streamlining communication through digital tools enhances efficiency, as in Toronto's tech sector. Canada's advanced tech infrastructure supports these strategies. For students, mastering technology in negotiations is key. Consider a trade negotiation in Vancouver. Virtual platforms and data analytics ensure equitable outcomes, reflecting Canada's innovation focus. Challenges include digital divides, but inclusive platforms mitigate risks. As we transition, we'll review our references, providing resources for mastering multi-party negotiations in Canada. To conclude, let's review the references informing our exploration of multi-party negotiations in Canada. Lewicki et al., 2020, in negotiation provide a comprehensive framework for coalition formation and team dynamics, applicable to Canada's complex landscape. Government of Canada, 2019, details the British Columbia carbon tax, highlighting multi-party coordination in environmental policy. British Columbia Ministry, 2016, documents the Great Bear Rainforest Agreement, showcasing collaborative resource management with Indigenous and industry stakeholders. Indigenous and Northern Affairs Canada, 2017, outlines Indigenous rights, critical for culturally sensitive negotiations. Trans Mountain Corporation, 2020, provides context for the pipeline case, emphasizing principal-agent dynamics. For students, these sources offer a foundation for navigating Canada's negotiations. Explore them to master coalition building, team strategies, and cultural sensitivity. Consider a negotiation in Ontario's energy sector. Collaborative and ethical approaches ensure equitable outcomes, reflecting Canada's inclusive ethos. This lecture equips you with tools for sustainable agreements in Canada's diverse contexts. Thank you for your attention.